Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us on a gloriously gray Monday afternoon. This meeting of the Faculty Senate will come to order. Welcome, everyone. If you've not already done so, please make sure you check in using your Seaboard mobile ID so you get credit for attendance. If you're having difficulty, you can check in with the folks at the desk outside the room. For our colleagues connecting from a distance, please begin your response with Potomac State or WVU Tech. And if I might ask, Potomac State, how many are present?
Potomac State has 2 present today.
Thank you. WVU Tech, how many are present?
WVU Tech has 2 senators present, but can't hear you.
But you can't hear us. Okay, we will work on that. You guys want me to pause over there for a bit? All right, we will persevere on while they manage that minor snafu. Okay, first item, the minutes of the previous meeting have been distributed as an annex to your agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes from the October meeting? Okay, hearing no corrections or additions, the minutes are approved as written. Thank you. All right, President Gee is absent traveling today, and as is the provost, but we have some minor additions here from the provost's office. Thank you, C.B. Wilson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. The things that I have to tell you in some instances may be old news, but this is the packet that I've been handed, so I'm going to present it. First of all, as you may know, John Chambers, the former CEO and chairman of Cisco Systems, announced Friday that a gift of his time and talent will support a startup engine at the College of Business and Economics, which will be renamed the John Chambers College of Business and Economics. In addition to his current responsibilities, B&E Dean Javier Reyes will lead the initiative as Vice President for Startup West Virginia, coordinating efforts across the university that contribute to the state's innovation economy. Chambers' gift will also include financial support to build out and operate the startup engine, to create a philanthropic venture capital fund in support of the project. It will create a Center for Artificial Intelligence Management to explore artificial intelligence's opportunities and challenges, and it will also establish a fund to support the creation of the Center for Artificial Intelligence Management. Chambers will also volunteer 5% of his time to provide expertise to WVU. I have no idea what that last statement actually means. All right. James F. Wood, a longtime energy executive and the current director of the WVU-managed U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center, Advanced Coal Technology Consortium, has been appointed interim director of the West Virginia Energy Institute. He will replace Brian Anderson, who has been chosen to lead the National Energy Technology Laboratory, an agency of the U.S. Department of Energy. 3 outstanding young women at WVU have been named finalists for the Rhodes Scholarship. Emma Harrison and Andrea Pettit, both from Morgantown, and Virginia Jenny Thrasher of Springfield, Virginia, will interview with the Rhodes District 11 Committee of Selection in Chicago on November 16th and 17th. The Rhodes Scholarship provides all expenses for 2 to 4 years of study at the University of Oxford. Karen Diaz has been appointed permanent dean. Well, and whenever you refer to a permanent position, we all know that we're all just penciled in anyway. But She has been appointed permanent dean of WVU Libraries, after having served as interim dean since July 2017. In April, she was among 17 top academic library directors to be selected as library senior fellows at UCLA, where she attended a 3-week development program. At WVU, she has led many new initiatives through the libraries, including the launch of the Research Repository, the Research Commons, and other programs on textbook affordability and open access resources. Keith Jackson, interim dean of the College of Creative Arts, has been appointed to the position permanently. Jackson stepped into the role as interim dean following former Dean Paul Kreider's appointment as associate provost for undergraduate education in our office. Jackson has been a member of the music faculty since 1995, serving both as a professor of music, particularly of trombone, and director of the School of Music prior to his initial appointment as interim dean. Dan Robison will be leaving his position as dean of the Davis College to serve as dean of Iowa State University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences next spring. Since his appointment in 2012, Robison has overseen the development of several new facilities and record student enrollment and retention. Ken Blemmings, current dean of the Honors College, will serve as interim dean of the Davis College when Robison departs. Vicki Green has been appointed as the director of the WVU Women's Business Center to assist entrepreneurs across the state in all stages of business development, with a special focus on women-owned and managed businesses. A WVU alum, Green has 25 years of public and private sector work experience in management, marketing, and public administration, in addition to an academic background in business practicum. WVU's Gay Stewart joins luminaries Carl Sagan, Richard Feynman, and numerous Nobel laureates as a recipient of the Hans Christian Ørsted Medal from the American Association of Physics Teachers. The award recognizes an individual who has had outstanding, widespread, and lasting impact on the teaching of physics. Stewart is the Eberly Distinguished Professor of STEM Education in the Physics and Astronomy Department and Director of the Center for Excellence in STEM Education. WVU continues to be a part of a multi-million-dollar effort across a 10-university alliance to support STEM education in Appalachia. Funded for a third phase by a 5-year, $3.5 million NSF grant, the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation will examine underrepresented students' perceptions of science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines, and careers to work to improve recruitment, retention, and graduation rates of these students. An interdisciplinary team of WVU researchers is investigating how children's health and education outcomes can be improved through school-based health centers. To address these challenges, Simon Hayter, Assistant Professor of Political Science, and Sarah Anderson, Assistant Professor of Child Development and Family Studies, have been selected to participate in the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program. Carrie White, the director of the WVU Launch Lab, has been named Assistant Vice President for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Since joining the Launch Lab in 2016, White has provided guidance to more than 1,800 students interested in starting their own businesses or innovations. At the Global Consortium on Entrepreneurship Center's annual conference last month, the Launch Lab was recognized as an outstanding entrepreneurship center. Azalea Holbert has been appointed to a new position as Director of Academic Integrity. An expert in the field, she brings significant experience as a practitioner, researcher, and consultant in higher education. Azalea is recognized as a presenter and facilitator both domestically and abroad, and has designed, developed, and implemented on-campus initiatives focused on integrity. Jerry Wood has been appointed to lead the Office of Veterans Affairs. Jerry served 33 years of active duty in the U.S. Army. Over the course of his career, he was deployed to Korea, Croatia, Bosnia, and Iraq, held 3 commands, and served 7 years in multi-service NATO assignments. He also served as a regional director for the Army's Soldier for Life program, developing veteran initiatives in the southeastern United States. He also happens to be a band person, so that's an extra point for him as well. Finally, Robert Bossart, an associate professor in the WVU School of Public Health, has received a $13.3 million award from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute to study online cognitive behavior therapy as a treatment for depression. Bossart directs the WVU Injury Control Research Center and teaches in the WVU School of Medicine. His work could be especially advantageous for depressed patients in Appalachia who live far from providers of in-person therapy. That is the report from the Provost's office. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you have about these things or other matters. So have at me. Any questions from Potomac State or Tech?
Potomac State has no questions, sir. Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
All right. I'll be back a little bit later in the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a few items to deal with as Faculty Senate Chair. Worth noting that the constitutional amendments that we talked about at the October meeting have passed the vote in the faculty, and so those amendments are now in effect. As a result of this, we have some additional members. The changes allowed for the chairs of committees and other officers, if not already senators, to become senators. So for those keeping track at home, we now need 54 for a quorum, up slightly. A few other changes which we'll sprinkle throughout the system as we move forward. Of more relevance, the WVU Governmental Affairs team has approached some of the Senate leadership to get the Senate's input on future campus carry legislation. They expect the NRA and other groups to push hard to get something in the new West Virginia legislative session when it comes into existence in January. WVU will push back to the best of our ability, but if it looks like the bill will pass over our objections, WVU would like to negotiate with the bill sponsors to carve out as many exceptions as we can carve out to, for the best ability to achieve sort of a safe and secure campus. So some of the Senate leadership is working up on a list of what we'd like to ask for in sort of rank order. That will move its way to exec and then come to Senate so for a full discussion, presumably in either December or January as the session moves forward. And so we'll consult with the whole Senate to sort of talk through what we want and what we don't want to ask for as part of a campus carry legislation. Also to note, the December Senate meeting will be slightly different in format, where I'm going to try something a little bit different at the meeting. When you come in, rather than these rows of seats, we'll have round tables out, so everyone can sit at the round tables. I'm going to try at the end of that meeting to sort of break everyone up into a working group. So the GEF committee has been asked by Stuart Hall to rethink the GEF system and what skills and courses should be a part of that. And so as part of that, we're going to sort of form a working group and talk through some of the basic life skills that we think across the board students at WVU and other institutions should have coming out of that. So we'll have a brief exercise at the tail end of the meeting next time where everyone, senators and not, are welcome to sit around and sort of help think through. I've got some guided questions and we'll break people up into groups. We'll work through some of those things, which will then go back to the GEF committee for them to sort of review and come up with proposal, which will then will eventually work its way up here into the Senate. So you'll see the results of your discussions. So just a heads up, I'll give you more information. We'll send some out over the next month. But as you approach the meeting next time, just note the seating arrangements will be different, and I'll sort of inform you about how things are going to happen from that point on. Finally, to note that one of our senators, Gretchen Garofoli, has been doing flu shots here both before the meeting and after. So for all of you who brought your PEIA card or other healthcare cards, please take advantage of that and go get a free flu shot after the meeting. She'll set up and be there until about 5:30 or 6, so please take advantage of that. Flu's not anything to mess around with, so I strongly encourage you to go take advantage of that, and we certainly thank her for doing that for the Senate. That's it for me. Anyone got questions for me? Lou? All right, then let's move on to our slate of folks who are going to talk to us today. So first up, we'll have Barb Dawson, our Associate Provost for Information Technology, and she'll talk a little bit about the changing WVU email policy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Monday. Shouldn't take too long. I really want to talk today not about the email policy that's changing, but the email policy that changed, which is maybe in a bit backwards order. But the reason that I'm here is because after we changed the email policy, there were a lot of questions about A, how did we put that policy in place, and B, various questions about the policy. So the timing is a little bit odd from a follow-up perspective because the agenda's been full. But let me just talk first about the policy for putting, the process for putting ITS policies in place. It seems pretty straightforward. We follow sort of the recommended process used by the Board of Governors, and that is to, gather information. So we research best practices. What are our peers doing? What's the Big 12 doing? Then we get input from all of the academic and administrative IT directors. We make lots of changes accordingly. Then we put out policies for public comment. For the email policy, we did that in March of this year. Then we make changes after that. And then they go to the University Planning Committee for approval. The email policy, I think we lost count at edit 15. There was lots of comments and input provided from all over campus. So we made lots of changes and adjustments. So that's the process that we use to put policies in place in the ITS organization. And then I know we got several questions about the policy, and I just wanted to give people a chance to ask those, but I do know the question that we get the most about, the two questions we get asked most are, why are we not allowed to forward stuff elsewhere automatically from campus accounts? It's really not a problem if you forward your Mix account to your Office 365 account or the other way around. Nobody cares if you're sending one WVU email to another WVU email. Now there are a little bit different policies, I believe, in HSC in the hospital. I can't speak to those, so if I'm telling you something and you're at HSC, please look up the email policies there. They are different than the rest of campus. So we don't have any problem with people forwarding email between accounts. We also don't have a problem if people occasionally forward something from work to home, if you've got something to do, but if you're doing that consciously, and occasionally, Alex and I are not going to show up at your desk with a badge and handcuffs, okay? What we're trying to do is prevent an accidental, I don't want to say breach, that's not the right word, disclosure, I'm looking at Alex, what's the right word? Accidental disclosure of information by auto-forwarding information outside of campus. The other thing we get asked a lot about is about POP and IMAP of emails, that is downloading emails to personal devices. And the reason we have a practice not allowing that is because what happens whenever there is a lawsuit or a hold on email, what happens if you've downloaded your email to your own device or a personal device at home, that device then becomes in scope of a investigation. So we have a practice of not allowing that, sort of for everybody's best interest. So those are the things that we've kind of been asked the most about, but I just want to give everybody a chance to ask me any other questions that they have. And Alex is here, so if you ask me a security question that I have some questions about, he'll jump up and bail me out. you guys are an easy group. The last comment I will say is we are changing to some new policies around retiree email. We've already talked to the Faculty Wellness Committee. We've gotten everybody's buy-in there, and we'll get some stuff in writing, and we'll have it sent out with how that is going to work, and we'll begin making that transition after the first of the year. But we'll inform you about that. Shouldn't impact anybody in this room unless you're retiring between now and January, or after January, I guess. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we have Azalea Holbert, who already had a nice introduction from C.B. Wilson, and Carrie Showalter. Azalea Holbert, Director of Academic Integrity, and Carrie Showalter, the Executive Director of the Office of Student Conduct.
Good afternoon. I'll go first. Again, as Dave said, my name is Carrie Showalter, and I'm with the Office of Student Conduct. It's a role that I have been in just since July, so I'm fairly new. But he has asked us to come and speak today about changes to the Campus Student Code. And there's been several minor changes, but the major change that I think he wanted me to highlight is that we now have a process that when students are charged and they are up for suspension or expulsion, so for our more serious level cases, prior to October 17th, when a student was charged, they went in front of a hearing panel. And I see several people out here who actually have served on those panels. And now for charges after October 17th, instead of a hearing panel, we actually have moved to a single adjudicator model. So we will have one individual who is she actually currently hears the employee grievances. Her name's Sue Keller, and she'll be the individual presiding over the conduct hearings. And so he'd asked me to come and explain that to you a little bit. We also have several minor changes that I'm happy to go into, but that's probably the biggest change. And there's been a lot of opinions and thoughts about that. I am told that it's a pilot program and that we're going to assess it and see how it goes after the first year. But does anybody have any questions about the changes to our conduct process? I was expecting more than that, I was going to say. All right, do you?
Could you talk?
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit about the metrics you're using to assess the success or failure of the program? So what data are you collecting over time?
I look at Lou. That's a really good question. I can't tell you the answer to that, and so I don't know. I mean, as far as, I just don't know what metrics we are looking at. We haven't started it yet. Our first case with our single adjudicator is on Friday, and so we will certainly work with people on campus who specialize in assessment to look at that, because I'm not necessarily sure, which factors we would look at, but we will certainly look at Lou and other people to see how we can do that. So I don't have a concrete answer for you yet. So, yes.
Hi, Lynn Cosman from Sociology and Anthropology. Can you explain why we would take the most serious cases away from a committee decision and give them to a single person rather than doing that with more minor cases, which would seem more logical?
The minor cases, the only reason why the serious cases are required to go to a panel because of due process rights, because there's a potential of them being separated from the university. As far as why they've moved from a hearing panel to a single adjudicator, I can tell you this was in the works long before I got here, but it's my understanding that they're looking for consistency in terms of outcomes, that, we had changing panels, and oftentimes there would be cases that were similar fact pattern, and there was variance in terms of the outcome, and also in terms of the sanctioning. And then the other thing that I am told as one of the major reasons is in terms of convening a panel. A lot of our cases, if they are serious cases that are up for suspension or expulsion, the hope is that we can move through that process in a faster fashion. And so with a single adjudicator, we can schedule those much more faster than we can with the hearing panel. So those are the reasons that we have gotten to this process, or to this point.
And Carrie's just more or less said what we'll probably end up looking at in terms of assessing it, is that we're going to look at consistency to sanctions, as well as then time to completion. Yeah. Those are the obvious things we've been asked to look at. If other things come up from primary stakeholders in this process, we'll add them, but those are the things I've been given so far.
Yeah. And as far as the academic integrity cases, which is the piece that you all would, those are the more serious cases. Azalea can talk a little bit about the academic integrity policy. Yes.
So I've been a member of the board in the past, and I'm assuming that students will still be able to be represented by legal service, like lawyers.
Yes.
Because this is more of a judge versus jury, will those that can't afford or get a lawyer on their own be given any type of law students or anything to help make that a more fair process?
We've talked about that, and currently, students can have an advisor, but the advisors, I've learned this term, they're called pot at plant, so the advisors are actually not allowed to do anything in the hearings, but the attorneys can fully represent students. That is one thing we've talked about, is how we can maybe expand that advisor role a little bit, and we have talked about using students from the law school. We're not really sure exactly how that would look, but other schools do allow a more expanded advisor role, and so the thought is that maybe there's more people we can train a little bit, so that they can make sure that students get, that they have someone to advocate for them. So that's important. I understand that, and so that the intention is not to certainly bias that in terms of people that can afford counsel. So we are looking at that.
Are they going to create some sort of opinion or some sort of written document such that fact patterns that are similar will get treated the same? Is that currently being done?
Well, I can tell you, the way it's currently done now is that when a student goes to a hearing and there's a finding of responsibility, it's a two-phase process. So they go to the hearing, and the hearing panel would determine responsibility, and then they would sanction them. And so the hearing outcome letter basically goes into the facts that they rely upon to determine responsibility, and then there's some additional information as to why the sanctioning and the reasoning behind the sanctioning. I believe that Sue Keller is going to give it more of an expanded opinion, and so I believe it's because right now the way it is, we put enough information in the letter that the student should be able to look at it and figure out why they've been found responsible and why those sanctions are in line with the finding. And so I don't know, because we haven't had any opinions out yet, but it is my understanding that there is going to be a more expanded outcome document. I will tell you the problem with that, though, is it's an educational process, and so we really need to make sure that whatever we are writing in terms of outcome and finding is something that an 18, 19, 20-year-old can digest, and that it's not something that is kind of burdensome with any kind of legal language. So it is still an educational process, and so I don't know what that will look like, but I am being told that it will be in an expanded findings and letter. So, any other questions?
Just
Sure.
one final senatorial note. I guess at this point then we can cease the panel that provide, the committee that provides you with faculty members for the student panels, since you won't need them anymore.
Yeah, well, yes. We have not trained anybody. That a decision was made. We were told not to train anybody for this coming year. We do have a couple cases that were charged prior to October 17th where we do still have some hearing panels, but they're phasing out. So yes, we would not need, but I will say, again, if I'm told this is a pilot process, currently we would not need that committee.
Do you have timing on the pilot process?
I am told that we're going to look at after the first year. And so, again, I think once we look at those metrics on how we're assessing them, we need to look and see if in fact they are more consistent, and if in fact we are able to hear these, have the hearings convened in a quicker fashion. So once we figure out those metrics, we'll assess it, and I imagine they will go from there. So, all right, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Carrie. As Carrie mentioned, I'm focused more on the academic integrity piece of things, which I'm sure concerns many of you. I'm sure some of you I've already had reports from this year for incidents of academic dishonesty. So part of what I've been tasked with as the Director of Academic Integrity is looking at the policy, working on some revisions. I know over the past several years there have been tweaks to how the academic integrity policy works in terms of the nuts and bolts of reporting. And there has actually been a dramatic increase in reporting over the years. Lou actually started tracking in detail the academic dishonesty reports last year, and we had somewhere close to 450 reported incidents. Most of those, the students were held responsible. Some of those escalated up to the student conduct process for those more serious sanctions that Carrie was talking about that can result in separation from the university. But what I'm really looking at right now is, what works in the policy, what doesn't. Lou and I and some others are working with a very wide-ranging committee that we'll be getting together with soon with representation from across the university, including faculty and students, who can really give some input on what this new policy needs. I will say in terms of my priorities, one of them is the definitions of academic dishonesty. Carrie mentioned having outcome letters that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds can digest. And that's the problem I'm running into with our current definitions of academic dishonesty as an institution. They're very complex. They're not something that you just read and kind of intuitively understand. So that's going to be something that I'm really looking at at changing in this new policy. And that's actually something that Lou and I have discussed that we found in the, or that he found in the data last year, was that faculty, when they reported cases of academic dishonesty, would check several boxes as far as what type of dishonesty occurred. And that was really, that really seemed to be because some of those categories overlap. So that's one piece we're really working on cleaning up so that it is easier for you as faculty members to report something that you suspect is dishonesty. So you can just look at the form and say, oh, that's definitely cheating on an exam, or that's definitely plagiarism. Because the goal is really to keep, or to streamline the process if it needs to be more streamlined, gather the data that we need to make correct decisions if cases escalate up to student conduct, but also keep it simple for faculty. One of the other big things that we're looking at is how students are escalated to student conduct. Typically that is for students who are repeat offenders or who do something that is particularly aggravated. The way the process works right now is when I see something flagged as a repeat offense, I notify the college or school where the student is majoring, and then they can make the request or make the call to have student conduct look at that case. But that's leading to a lot of inconsistency because some schools ask for that extra review consistently and others don't. So we're really looking at how to make that more consistent and fair, where every student who's a repeat offender or who does something egregious is at least reviewed by student conduct. Another big piece is the educational piece. As Carrie said, everything in student conduct is an educational process, but we're really committed to that being particularly true with academic integrity issues. So designing a process where every student who commits academic dishonesty gets some educational intervention so that they can hopefully learn from the process. Again, that's sort of piecemeal right now. I know some faculty do have that kind of educational conversation with students, but not all are. And so we're really just hoping to tighten that process up and make sure that students have the chance to learn something. And then as a continuation of that, if they then offend again after they've had some kind of educational intervention, the sanctions would potentially be more serious after that. So those are kind of the highlights of what we're looking at with policy. The other issue related to that is reporting. Some colleges, their faculty do a great job of reporting, others don't. So if you see a situation involving academic dishonesty, please do report it. The Academic Standards Resources website on the Office of the Provost webpage, that is where the academic dishonesty forms are. And it's an online form, so it's pretty simple to fill out. And those reports are invaluable because that way we know who's committing dishonesty, where it's happening, what kind, and we can really help use, or that data helps us inform policy as we go forward. And if you ever have questions, I'm also happy to be a resource to any of you, whether it's a question about whether something was academic dishonesty or what the sanctions should be. I'm happy to be a sounding board. And if you have policy ideas, as I said, we have representation from across the university, but I'm happy to take questions now, or if you think of something later, you can reach out. So any questions? Other than funny faces from Lou? Okay. Currently, the timeline that we're looking at is to wrap up these policy revisions by the end of this year so that they can go into next year's catalog. It's something that we know is going to take some time to get feedback from faculty and students, but it's also something we want to move forward as quickly as possible. But since it is both a catalog policy and a student conduct policy, we're trying to look at it in terms of the academic year so that we get it into next year's catalog. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, folks. Next up, we have Lisa Sharp, who will talk about the shared services operations and the changes coming there.
Hi, I'm not Lisa Sharp. This is Lisa. I'm Paula Congilio, Vice President of Finance for the university. Rob Alsop was supposed to join Lisa today to start the conversation of shared services, but he was double booked and asked me to take his part in the role. So I'm here today to introduce shared services. Now, we've been talking about this university-wide for quite a long time now, And I would imagine most of you have heard some things about it. And just recently, the first week or so of October, there were 3 campus conversations that were held. The slides that we're going to share today and the conversation that we're going to have is this same baseline information that we shared at the campus conversations. So if any of you joined in on those or watched them online, some of this will be repetitive, but we thought it was important that this group sort of hear the baseline information and understand where this project is going. So the background with shared services is this is a service delivery methodology where we integrate services across the university and try to really standardize the process to gain efficiencies. So as we gain those efficiencies, we'll reduce a lot of duplication of efforts, we'll standardize, we'll optimize, and we really, really the main goal of this project is to provide better services to all of our units. And when we say duplication of services, we really understand that the units and the colleges across the university have employed people who have certain parts of their job that have certain tasks, and everyone does them differently. Some do them better than others, and this process, shared services, is bringing these people together and making sure everybody is providing the best services back to faculty and staff. And generally, organizations that leverage a shared service model have one dedicated support center where these people will work together, they'll learn together, they'll be able to provide the same level of services. Generally, the calls that come in are tracked, and they'll support units across the university. So this project came out of, you might remember a couple of years ago, we did a lot of talking about our SWAT teams, and it was technically called the Transformation Through Innovation Business Practice Initiatives, which is why we nicknamed them all SWAT. So I think at the time we had maybe 13 or 12 or 13 different SWAT committees across the university. They dealt with everything from some of our procurement policies to hiring practices. And this, looking at shared services, came out of one of those teams. We did have a lot of procurement changes. I know you're all aware of Mountaineer Marketplace and My Expenses, our travel module. So a lot of good things have come from that and have been able to save the university quite a bit of money in working with vendors and negotiating good rates. So another one of the projects that's come from this is looking at the shared service project. And certainly as we go through these, we are looking to reduce costs, but more importantly, provide the best services to everyone. So back in 2017, you might have worked with a lot of people who were taking an assessment of their position, sort of a survey. And we brought these people together and they answered, I don't even know how many questions it was. It was a very extensive survey. And we wanted to get a feel for who was doing what across the university. And certainly what we found is there were people who felt that their jobs touched human resources, touched finances, touched pre- and post-award with grants, touched facilities. And so you had one FTE who their job duties were sort of spread all across the board. And what we found were we have a lot of people out there doing transactional work. So in your college or unit, you might have an EBO office where you're hoping to get some strategic and analytical help, and they're buried in transactional work. So again, shared services is trying to pull that transactional work out of the units, bring it together in a shared service center, and provide the best services back to the units. And of course, we're trying to get rid of any duplicate services that we have. So what you'll see here in this chart is we are looking in the areas of finance, human resources, and post-award grants management. And as you look at these circles, you'll see that the intersection of those is the shared service center. But what we're trying to point out here is much of the service that you receive in finance, human resources, and in your research worlds will remain in your units. This is pulling those transactional people together and ensuring that they are the best trained to provide the services for you. We hope that this improved support will allow you as the faculty to focus more on your research and your service, free up additional time, And again, we also want this to help the career paths of these administrative people. As they work together and learn the best way to provide services to all the faculty, they're going to be better at their jobs, they're going to feel better at their jobs, and the people remaining in your units will no longer be focused on these transactional details, but will be there to help you more with the strategic and analytical things that you need to be doing and they need to be doing. And I think I'm turning it over to Lisa now.
Thanks, Paula. So to reiterate the project goals, we want to improve customer service. So allowing people to take off that administrative burden and be able to really focus on what they do, teaching, research, service. We also need to find efficiencies in systems and processes. So throughout the work of the last year, since we had our assessment, which was 2 years ago in 2017, the fall of 2017, we've really looked at where those efficiencies would be. What kind of processes did we need to, change? Where do we need to go? And Paula pointed out about the survey, we found that there's lots of transactional work happening all across our campuses, right? So we know that we've got people that wear a lot of hats and sometimes are so buried that they can't get out of the transactional. And transactional work can be very appealing because there's always a checkbox at the end, whereas strategic work takes a lot more time and thought and effort. So by pulling some of the transactional work away, we could relieve allow people to become more focused on that strategic or highly analytical work. The duplication of services, and I'll talk over the next few minutes about the work, the processes are the work, what do they do, what do we do? And we noticed, it was very apparent as people came to the table, we've got a lot of handoffs. We work in silos at times where people don't even realize that it's happening over and over again. But what it does for our services, things get caught up. You might send an email to somebody, where is this? And then nothing. Email silence. And so you really don't know where anything is happening. Has it even been handled, or are we still waiting on a result? And who has it? Duplication of service is one of the problems that we have because it's being done again and again, but maybe not being done well. Lastly, it's technology. So we need to find one space, one digital location, an online library that provides information. People know where to go to get information. We have great people that work with us in our units, and they know a lot of information, but sometimes they have to go somewhere else to find it. And if they know the terminology, if they know the website to approach, if they know where to go, it might limit the time of getting resolution. But sometimes when that person's not available or they don't know the answer or that information's in their head and they've left because they were so fortunate to be promoted, or maybe a spouse gets another job and they move along with them, they leave us. We don't have that information anymore. So we need to make sure that we're planning and developing a tool that will help us understand what we need to do and how to get things done. That's all loops back to that customer service. If we don't have the tools, if we don't provide those tools, how can we ever improve our customer service? So our project efforts to date. We've done a lot of collaborative work. We've pulled people into the tables to work with us, subject matter experts in all these areas, human resources, finance, and post-award grants management. We've also had faculty focus groups to hear to talk about the project in a little more in a small setting, to hear about the fears, challenges, the change concerns. We've done a lot of those kinds of meetings. And we did that so that we could build the project. We took the work activities assessment and found out what areas do we have areas that were spread across, people doing many, many things, touching things once or twice a year, not really understanding what they needed to do, which created a backlog of processes for getting things done. And we used that information to develop what we would do. So the first thing we tackled were policies. Policies are really the guidance of what's being done. And our policies, some of them were very old. And when I say policies, I don't want them to get confused. We've got our Board of Governors rules. These are policies at the department level. So if I'm talking about a policy from human resources, I might be talking about temporary services or maybe volunteering. If I'm talking about finance, I might be talking about something relating to equipment, or I could be talking about memberships under procurement. I could be talking about revenue recognition as it relates to the financial statements, those kinds of policies. So we needed to figure out what our guidance was. And then we got into the work, the processes. What are we doing? And so, what kind of things are we doing, and where could we make enhancements to them to change? So things that are very common across the institution, we make deposits all over the place. We pay people. Everybody who's an employee wants to get paid. That's a very common process. What kind of work would belong to a service center? And what kind of work still belongs to a unit, a department, a college, a non-academic unit, a school? So we had to map those out, and that's why we brought so many people together. And that's why we've taken a lot of time and effort to make sure people understand what we're doing, where we're going, and how do we do it better. So the last piece of this is the technology. And when we think about technology for a service center, and this is where it can become a little confusing because there are shared services all over the place. In the for-profit world, they've been around for a long time. In higher ed, they've been around for the last 10 years. People have all kinds of opinions about them, and they don't look or feel the same in every instance. Some of them are similar, but what we needed to focus on was was technology, and specifically our case management system, which is what will manage the work, as well as the knowledge base, that online library that I mentioned. So that's our efforts to date. Now I want to talk a little bit about the service delivery. And these slides are very similar to the campus conversation, but not exact. So if you want to see what we talked about at the campus conversation, we have the shared services website at sharedservices.wvu.edu, and there'll be a slide at the end, I think, that shows that. You can see what we said. There's also FAQs about the project. Where are we going? What have we done thus far? We want to make sure that people are aware of what's happening with the project. But the first piece of it is service delivery. And service delivery is a service center, and then there are other pieces. And if we go back to what Paula talked about with the circles and how the service center was in the middle of those circles, and we're talking about the 3 areas of scope, we have a service center, but then we also have what we call strategic business advisors or grants managers. Those are employees that are embedded within units, within colleges, within schools to do more strategic types of activities. Next, we have our central units. Our central units have existed, but they, will be refocused more on strategic and highly analytic work advisement. So, and we'll talk a little bit more. I have slides for each one of them, but let's talk about the service center. So the service center equals where you get help. A lot of times you may not know what to do, how to get help, or you might kind of spur a little bit of, where should I go? And there could be somebody who sits outside of your office who is wonderful, and she or he can direct you in the manner that you need to go, but it might be 5 o'clock on Saturday and you're not really sure how to do something. We don't have resources that help us with that. So that's what we want. We want a service center to be a direct line for help. We want you to know that if you have a question, you can go there. So the work that we see in our service center will be customer service related. So customer service, transactional work, keying into a system. I said it was commonplace, so it's very common across the university. It's not specific. So if somebody has a very specific question about a department or a college, school, that would probably go back to that unit because it's so specific. But if it's general in nature, it's going to be handled by the service center. If it's processing related, it's going to be handled by the service center. Paula mentioned one location. So with our service center, it will be one location where this work is happening. But there will be many ways to get information or help from the service center. You can call, you can send an email. Using case management, you may be even, depending upon what system we use, there may be other technology, ways through technology to contact the service center. And there's also going to be opportunities to walk in to storefronts that'll be located across campuses so that you have that one-on-one. Things that I heard from my faculty focus groups over the last year was about relationships, was about proximity. that proximity of service when somebody's close by, how, that's where I get my service. I don't want to lose that. So understanding that there will be opportunities for face-to-face guidance as well as other ways to get guidance. The big piece here is that we will use our case management system to track, to understand what the challenges are. Where are we failing? Where are the isolated incidences, and where are the big things that nobody knows because they're pocketed within our different silos? So we will use our case management system to understand what's happening across the institution. Now, that could be, if we're tracking everything, it's a great tool to track everything, but really, where does it go from there? Well, there's an accountability factor that's being built into the service center, which means we'll be working with all of our units to determine the expectations. How quickly should we be getting back to you? How quickly should a resolution happen? And then what happens when it doesn't happen? Or if we want to be positive, what happens when it's happening quicker than we thought it was? If the information's readily available because we've built a great online library, that's a positive thing, that we're seeing enhancements to our systems. And then where else can we go with the service? How else can we provide better service? So we really just want to limit the confusion for help. I have a couple examples that I'll talk about, and I had one faculty member that I interviewed, and it was just a one-on-one, and she really felt like, and it was relating to her grant support. She would email, nothing. Then she would email again, and somebody said, yep, we're taking care of it. But there was no way to know that it's being taken care of. If you use some of the new systems like Mountaineer Marketplace, and if you're actually in them, you can see that there are ways to track when you make a purchase and when it's processed. It's very open and apparent. Well, so will the case management system be. So you're aware of, what? I asked for assistance on Friday at 3 o'clock, and as part of our agreement with this type of request, the expectation is that I get a response within 3 hours. Did I get that response? Can I have a response at 6 o'clock at night because that's outside of our typical university hours? Well, with a service center with fluctuating hours, yes, you certainly can, and it would be built into the workflow process for the service center. We will use our service level agreements, those written agreements, to help us measure our successes as well as our failures and help to improve. And we do have, as part of the service center, customer satisfaction, operational excellence built in so that not only is it measured within a system, but there's still an operational excellence element where somebody's coming out and making sure that, are we hearing you? Are you getting the kind of service that you need? Really, this process is built around customer service for our customers, for all of you as faculty, and for those working at the university, and those doing business with the university. So some other things that have happened, and you may feel, this may have happened to you as well, and we see it differently with the service center. We had a faculty member that had a grant and got a refund, got a reimbursement on that grant. Whatever reason, sometimes other agencies pay for supplies, things, there can be checks applied against grant funds. It was applied to the wrong funding string, so it wasn't applied to a grant fund. How difficult is that when that happens? Well, it can be really difficult if you don't know what you're doing, or if your person that you're working with has a challenge. The faculty member contacted somebody who then told them, well, you should contact so-and-so because they'll help you. Well, by the 5th person of contacting them, and over the course of the week, they did get resolution, but they had to contact 5 different people. With our service center service delivery, you would contact the service center, and then you would watch that it is, your challenge would be, handled by the service center personnel, and you could see it through our case management system. It's just a different way to provide customer service. I had another example when I was talking to a postdoc who was working for a faculty member with a busy research program, and they wanted to hire somebody, and she worked about 2.5 weeks on it. She did go to a person in her unit, and that person didn't realize that they had support within the college to help with hiring. And so when the postdoc was working on trying to get this person, or get a position in place to hire somebody, she didn't realize that she didn't know all the steps. So it took her a long time, and it's a challenging process if you don't do it, but once or twice a year, or even if you've never done it. So once she found out there was actually somebody in place, it took about 2 days. It was really quick, but she didn't know. And so sometimes this is just not knowing our resources that we have. And what the Service Center does is makes it obvious, and it's an apparent way, one way in to get help. So things that we see, you can see the activities that we see with the Service Center, basic questions being answered. And I said this at the conversations, but things like, I wrecked the rental car, what do I do? That information's out there on the website, but when you're upset, you may not know it. And what website is it? Is it on the insurance website? Is it on procurement's website, the rental car website? Where is it? And if it's on Sunday evening, who do I call in my office because they're not even there? Other things, my leave is wrong. I'm taking time off, my leave is wrong. How can I get that fixed? Or maybe it's not wrong, but I want to know. How do I get, my payroll deductions changed? How do I get a P card? I need a P card for my research program. What kind of P card do I need? Is there, there's 3 different types of P cards, really? Maybe, is it a foundation, is it state, is it research? I don't really know. So how do I know, right? So these are questions that, yes, there are people available within units, and if you are so fortunate to have somebody that helps you, then you know how wonderful it is to be able to get those questions answered. But when someone is not there, or you don't have that support, that's when the challenges come. And at these faculty meetings that I had, the faculty focus group meetings, and I had large and small group meetings, it was very obvious the units that had the support versus the ones that didn't. So this is leveling the playing field as far as providing that support. Everybody has a way to get support. Some other stuff I mentioned, it's customer service based, but there's also transactional work that'll be done. So reconciliations. Right now, we've got units that have grants managers or some form of a grants manager that helps with reconciling grants. They really can't get to some of the higher level stuff because they're focused on why are the encumbrances wrong on my grant. A transaction didn't come in from the iLab system. I'm waiting on that. So that makes a difference on the balance on my report. What if reconciliations happening within the Service Center? And those reports shared with our folks that are embedded in the units to support our PIs with their research. As well as if we take it outside of the grants realm and just talk about the GL, where maybe people have faculty startup accounts, they might have other research earning accounts, overhead, understanding those reconciliations too. Things that need to be happening on a monthly basis that may or may not be able to happen because of the burden of all the transactional work happening within our units. And then the last thing is king of data. We see that king of positions, king of payroll lines, that will all happen within our Service Center. The next is part of the service delivery, but not part of the Service Center. So just to be clear about that, our strategic business advisors as well as our grants managers. And those are positions that we see staying embedded within the units. Unique to the units, not common, highly analytical, part of a circle of service delivery, so they help support. If something needs to be escalated out of the Service Center, they can support and still be tracked as part of a question that needs answered or resolved, but not part of the Service Center. They do things like supporting your deans, helping them make decisions, forecasting, financial forecasting, personnel decisions, looking at the administrative burden on the grants, providing that, lifting that burden off and looking at the grants themselves, understanding the regulatory challenges with our external funding, looking at overspending, underspending, preventing those things. That's really what we see our strategic people doing, strategic business advisors as well as grants managers. Central units, they've existed for a long time, and they're centers of expertise, maybe with insurance or risk, financial statements, tax services. But as we went through our process mapping, as we looked at the what's, we determined, there's some things within those central units that are very transactional in nature too, that need to come out and be moved into the Service Center as well. So completing that service delivery circle, essentially, being able to be there for escalation, but not part of that day-to-day transactional work. They do things like, if policies change within, maybe the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, they make those changes to our policies so that we represent. some other things, medical management, retirement, all of those things. And lastly, because I am being long-winded, we've taken a lot of time. We're getting a lot of input. Lots of stuff is going on in the next few months, the next year. We see a January 2020 implementation, but again, we're going to have people at the table helping us through these the next round of processing. And the biggest part of it now is organizational design. So we are working with our units, our colleges, our schools, the other non-academic units, and talking about positions that may or may not be affected. Positions will transition into the service center completely or maybe partially. So, it's going to take several months, and there's still going to be lots of questions. We want people to continue to watch our website, ask us questions. My contact information is out there. And we want to be as transparent as possible, yet we're taking our time to get it right. So with that, we can take questions, Dave.
I think we're all set.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right, we can move more directly here into the Senate business and try to push through that. So we have a curriculum committee report here from Ralph Utzman in place of Kim Floyd.
Do you want me to lump all these together in one motion? Would that be okay for
the-
everybody?
Yep.
So we have several for approval items. First is the new courses report, the course changes, deletions, and adoptions report. Those are annexes 1 and 2. Changes to the major in agribusiness management, changes to the major in environmental and energy resources management, and changes to the major in recreation, parks, and tourism resources.
Okay, so we're going to lump all those together. Are there any questions or points of discussion for annexes 1, 2, and the changes to the agribusiness, the environmental, energy, and resource management, and the recreation, parks, and tourism resources majors? Okay, all those in favor of approving annexes 1, 2, and the changes to the 3 majors, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Potomac State, how do you vote?
Potomac State votes 2 ayes, sir.
Thank you. WVU Tech, how do you vote?
WVU Tech has 4 ayes.
Thank you. The ayes have it. Annexes 1, 2, and the changed majors are approved. Thank you, sir. Next up, we have the GEF committee with Robert Brock for one item just for information.
Hello. We have 26 courses that are being proposed to switch from the GEC to the GEF.
Okay, so this is a for information item. No vote is needed. Are there any questions or points of discussion for the GEF transition review? Hearing none, we will file that. Next up, we have a report from the Faculty Representative of State Government by Roy Nutter. There he is.
Roy Nutter, Statler College and your ACF rep. Once again, it's relatively quiet on the Charleston front. There is a HEPC meeting this coming Friday, however, and reviewing the agenda, the audit for HEPC is in it. I would suggest, if you're interested, that you look up their meeting agenda on the HEP site and take a look at the audit. In the conclusion, I wanted to read you about 3 sentences here that kind of summarize. It says, essentially, most of the colleges and universities under the commission exhibit poor or limited financial health. Adequacy of financial resources is a significant concern. Appropriations, as well as tuition and fee revenues, are relatively low. Consequently, the ability to build adequate reserves is limited. Dependency upon student fees for capital needs has produced aged facilities at some institutions. State funding continues to decline, a negative impact on the institution's financial viability will persist. I'm interested to see what they have to say about that. So that's where I am. Hopefully you will take a few minutes and look at that audit. Other than that, that's about all that's happening, sir. Questions?
Any news on the funding formula?
I have heard nothing. I was hoping the president would be here and inform us, but I'll let you know next meeting what I hear.
Fair enough. Any other questions for Roy? All right, we're good. Can we get a Board of Governors report from Stan?
All right, so we had a Board of Governors meeting last Friday, November 9th. We dealt with several rules. Approved BOG rules 510 to 513, which covered policy or investment policy, debt policy, distribution of surplus property, and tuition and fees, waivers, payment, and reductions. We approved Rule 6.1, which dealt with student conduct, and also dealt with some minor changes due to mistakes in terminology in Rules 2.3 and 4.5. The next thing that will go out for the 30-day comment period, I believe tomorrow, will be the Board of Governors Rule 1.4, which concerns ethics, conflict of interest, and outside consulting arrangements. CB will be discussing that as soon as I get done. I would implore people that if you do any consulting at this university, that you take a very close look at Rule 1.4 and get your comments in over the next 30 days. It may be of interest to you. We received a report on the WVU and Research Corporation financial audits, both of which received a clean audit rating from the Clifton Larson Allen Fund. And then we also got to participate in a dinner Thursday night, which involved the Board of Governors, the board, and the boards of the WVU Foundation Alumni Association surrounding the naming of the Business and Economics College for John Chambers, which should be a great development at this university. So with that, I will quit.
Okay. Any questions for Stan? Okay, then next up, speaking of exact thing, CB Wilson will have a brief talk about the new consulting and conflict of interest policy.
Okay, so you have this in your packet, and as Stan suggested, what happened Friday was that the draft rule was introduced for a notice of proposed rule making, which is the first step in the approval process. And as he also noted, the 30-day comment period actually begins tomorrow and will run through December the 12th. So certainly I encourage you all to take advantage of that opportunity and submit comments as you wish. I can also mention to you that the vetting of where that draft stands right now includes what I've been calling the Faculty Rules Committee, which worked its way through the faculty rules last year, and it includes a number of current and former faculty members, leadership individuals from the Faculty Senate. It's also been vetted by the Research Office, the Provost's Office in general, Health Science Center Senior Administration, the University Planning Committee, the Provost Council, which includes all of the deans, and Faculty Senate Exec. So at this point, rather than trying to go through point by point, I think that if you've been able to read it, you pretty much know what's in the draft. Much of this language is actually in the ethics rule, which is in state code. And so a lot of it is not new. A lot of it is stuff that we are required to follow anyway. So at this point, I guess I can also mention that the two forms that were circulated to you actually, I believe, did not go to the board. Those would simply be forms that would be utilized as part of this broader process. And given all of that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have. And if I can't answer them, then I still suggest that you submit comments. Roy.
I did take a quick look through it. I guess what came to mind quickly, and maybe you've answered it, is that it seems like the faculty conflict of interest, and I forget the rest of the words, consulting and so on, looks like it's different than what's in the faculty handbook. So does that echo back and change the faculty handbook now?
Well, if this rule passes, then of course, and is approved, then that language would be changed, of course. Basically, there is general language in the faculty handbook that indicates that a faculty member can consult an average of 1 day a week. The language in this document expands upon that a little bit. It indicates that faculty who are on 12-month appointments should actually take a day of leave if they are going to consult and be remunerated. And there's also language in this document that suggests that an individual, in effect, should not interpret that previous language to mean that they can take a job at another institution or another firm on a regular 1 day a week basis throughout the year, which is a point that kind of bubbled up as we were discussing this. But basically, yes, the material that's in this would then be reflected in the faculty handbook. Scott?
Scott Fleming, College of Business and Economics. And I'm going to just ask a couple areas that may seem a little odd. So what about a faculty member or a member of administration serving on a board of directors for a for-profit firm where they pay the individual? That's not consulting, but that's outside the area. I think it's certainly reputation enhancing for the institution should they be on there, and I would not want to do anything to discourage faculty or administrators from doing those types of duties. Has that been contemplated?
Well, I don't think I can answer that directly because that hasn't been specifically raised at any of the meetings that I've attended.
Okay.
On the other hand, I know that the draft has been discussed with Javier, and if this is focusing on folks in B&E.
Well, I'm thinking about some folks in Stewart Hall I know who serve on boards, and I'm glad they do.
Okay, and I do not, so
Okay.
I can't immediately address that. However, I would suggest that although it's clear that it is not literally consulting, it might be perceived as a conflict of interest. And I think that, again, that probably would need to be vetted by...
And I don't think it's a conflict of interest for our administration folks to serve on boards, because I think it does good things for us, opens doors for us. The second thing I want to ask is...
Well, before you ask the second question, what I would suggest is that if it might be perceived as a conflict of interest, then folks ought to be talking to general counsel about it.
Certainly, certainly. I'm also responsible for executive education for the John Chambers College of Business and Economics. And so
yes.
It is outside the normal range of our appointment contracts, 9-month appointment contract, 40 teaching, 40% research, 20% service. So we do this as part of the West Virginia Going Forward initiative. Now, that is supportive of the university's mission, but I worry that we may run afoul of these compensation sort of guidelines that are within there. Has anything been discussed in relation to consulting not outside the university, but consulting through the university to some of these constituents?
Again, that question has not been raised in any of the meetings at which I have been present. But again, it quite possibly had been discussed between Stephanie Taylor and Javier, and maybe not. But
Okay.
Again, that might be a question that you would want to pass through the general counsel's office.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything from Potomac State or Tech?
No questions from Potomac State, sir. Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You might want to hang out. You're back here pretty quick.
All right.
I would encourage anyone who does outside consulting or has a business to take a look at the new BOG projected policies and make comments in the 30 days. It is rather extensive and they are changes. So granted it is catching up with West Virginia law, but it is actually changing the policies as I understand them that existed. So I really would recommend you look at that. All right, is there any new business at this point? Okay, we do have to move into executive session here and talk a bit about the honorary degrees. So, in order to consider honorary degrees, we need to go into executive session, and for that I will turn to Interim Faculty Secretary Matt Valenti.
Okay, I move that the Senate move into executive session under Chapter 6, Article 9A of the Code of West Virginia to avoid premature disclosure of an honorary degree.
I was about to say, is there a second? We seem to have found one. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed? Okay, at this point then, I need to ask for everybody who's not a senator and not Senate staff to please step out of the room, except for C.B. Wilson, who will introduce us to this. At the end of this, we will be adjourning, so those folks leaving won't miss very much.